Jasmine Torres wiped down the examination table for the third time that afternoon, her hands moving in practiced circles while her mind wandered to the conversation she dreaded. The veterinary clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog shampoo, familiar scents that usually brought her comfort. Today they only reminded her that she had nowhere to hide when her coworker Rachel cornered her during the lunch break. Rachel meant well. Everyone at the clinic meant well. That made it harder to refuse when they insisted she needed to get back out there and start dating again. 6 months had passed since her last relationship imploded in a mess of accusations and mistrust, and apparently that was long enough for everyone else to decide she should be ready to try again. The man they wanted to set her up with was a friend of Rachel's husband. A consultant who traveled frequently and had just settled in the area. Clean-cut, professional, allegedly kind. Jasmine listened to the description with a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else, nodding at appropriate moments while searching for an escape route that would not hurt anyone's feelings. By the time she left work, she had agreed to meet him for dinner that Friday. The weight of the commitment followed her home like a shadow she could not shake. Friday arrived too quickly. Jasmine stood before her bathroom mirror longer than necessary, applying makeup with careful precision. She chose a simple navy dress that her mother had bought her last Christmas, the kind of outfit that said polite and appropriate without revealing anything real. As she fastened silver earrings, she made a decision that felt both reckless and protective. If this stranger expected something traditional, something pure and uncomplicated, she would give him a reason to walk away before either of them got hurt. The restaurant sat near the marina, windows overlooking boats that bobbed gently in their slips. Jasmine arrived exactly on time, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. Blake Morrison was already there, seated at a corner table with a glass of water and an expression that seemed both relaxed and attentive. He stood when he saw her, his handshake firm but not aggressive, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that caught her off guard. They ordered food and made small talk about the weather, the traffic, the way the sunset painted the water in shades of amber and rose. Blake asked about her work with genuine interest, listening as she described the rescued greyhound who refused to trust humans and the elderly cat with diabetes whose owner visited twice daily. He did not interrupt with advice or anecdotes about his own pets. He simply listened as if her stories mattered. That attention made Jasmine nervous. She had armed herself for dismissal, not understanding. When he asked about her background, about what had brought her to veterinary medicine, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The question was innocent, but questions always led somewhere, and that somewhere usually involved expectations she had learned to fear. Before she could stop herself, the lie tumbled out smooth and practiced from weeks of rehearsal she had not realized she was doing. She told him she was not the kind of woman men brought home to their families. She said she had made choices that decent people would judge, that her past was complicated in ways that made her unsuitable for anything serious. The words felt like armor and confession all at once, designed to push him away before he could get close enough to hurt her. Jasmine waited for the familiar responses. The slight withdrawal, the polite change of subject, the checking of the watch that signaled an early exit. Men had patterns, and she had learned to read them well. Blake did none of those things. He set down his fork and looked at her with steady gray eyes that held neither judgment nor pity. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "I'm not here looking for someone's resume or collecting virtue points. I'm here because Rachel said you were interesting and kind, and so far she was right. Whatever you've done or haven't done before tonight is your business, not mine. What matters is who you choose to be from here." The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through assumptions Jasmine had built over months of self-protection. She felt heat rise to her face, not from shame but from the shock of being seen without being measured. Around them, other diners continued their meals, unaware of the small earthquake happening at the corner table. "You don't even know me," Jasmine said, her voice smaller than she intended. "Not yet," Blake agreed. "But I'd like to. If you're willing to let me try." The conversation shifted after that, moving into easier territory. He told her about his work helping companies improve their operations, about the satisfaction of solving problems that seemed impossible at first glance. She found herself laughing at his story about a warehouse manager who swore the inventory system was haunted, only to discover a family of raccoons had been rearranging boxes at night. The laughter felt foreign in her throat, like a muscle she had forgotten how to use. When they left the restaurant, Blake walked her to her car without assuming anything beyond that simple courtesy. He asked if he could see her again, phrasing it as a question rather than an expectation. Jasmine heard herself say yes before her doubts could form arguments against it. She drove home with her hands gripping the steering wheel, her mind replaying the moment he refused to judge her. The lie hung between them now, a barrier she had built that he had somehow walked around rather than through. She told herself she had done the right thing by being honest, even if the honesty was wrapped in fiction. She told herself that his reaction meant nothing, that time would reveal his true character the way it always did. But as she unlocked her apartment door and stepped into the quiet space where she lived alone, Jasmine could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. The armor she wore so carefully had shown its first crack, and the man who caused it had done so simply by refusing to play the game she expected. What she did not know, could not have guessed as she changed out of her dress and washed the makeup from her face, was that Blake Morrison carried secrets of his own. That the casual consultant persona he presented was itself a carefully constructed shield. That his net worth could buy the marina where they had dinner, the clinic where she worked, and a dozen buildings in between without making a dent in his accounts. As Jasmine fell asleep that night, Blake sat in the penthouse office of his downtown tower, looking at the city lights and thinking about the woman who had tried so hard to push him away. He had not lied to her, not exactly. But he had not told her the whole truth either, and that omission felt heavier than he wanted to admit. In separate spaces, both of them wondered if honesty was something that could be built retroactively, or if foundations laid on partial truths were doomed from the start. Neither had an answer yet. Neither knew that the question would matter more than either of them could imagine. F. The second date happened because Jasmine could not stop thinking about the first one. She told herself it was just coffee, just a Sunday morning at the cafe near the beach where she sometimes walked her clients' dogs. Nothing serious, nothing that required the defensive walls she usually kept so carefully maintained. Blake arrived before her, 2 cups already on the table as if he had memorized her order from a single dinner. The gesture was small but unsettling in its thoughtfulness. They talked about everything and nothing, about childhood dreams and adult compromises, about the way life rarely turned out the way anyone planned. He asked questions that dug deeper than surface pleasantries, and Jasmine found herself answering with an honesty that felt dangerous and liberating at once. Over the next 3 weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Walks along the waterfront where seagulls screamed overhead and the salt air cleared her head. Quick lunches between her shifts when he happened to be in the area. Phone calls that stretched past midnight, conversations that wandered from philosophy to favorite foods to fears neither had voiced before, but normal was an illusion, and cracks began to show in ways Jasmine could not ignore. His phone rang constantly, calls he would excuse himself to take with a tension that never quite left his shoulders. She noticed the way people watched him in restaurants, their eyes tracking his movements with a recognition she could not place. Once, a woman approached their table and addressed him as Mr. Morrison with a deference that made Jasmine's stomach tighten. Blake dismissed her politely, but the interaction lingered like smoke. "Who was that?" Jasmine asked when they were alone again. "Someone from work," he said, which was true but incomplete. She let it go because questioning felt like pushing, and pushing felt like caring too much too soon. But the questions accumulated like debts she would eventually have to collect. The attention escalated in subtle increments. A photographer outside the cafe one morning, camera pointed in their direction before disappearing into the crowd. A car that followed them for 3 blocks before turning away. Blake noticed these things with a wariness that suggested experience, his body language shifting into something protective and alert. Jasmine began to feel watched even when she was alone. At the clinic, a man in an expensive suit waited near the entrance and asked if she had a moment to discuss her relationship status. She refused and reported him to her supervisor, who promised to handle it but looked troubled in a way that suggested complications beyond simple harassment. Rachel pulled her aside after a particularly long shift, concern written across her face. "Is everything okay with you and Blake?" Because Tom mentioned that his friend said Blake wasn't exactly who he seemed to be. "What does that mean?" Jasmine asked, defensive instincts rising. Rachel hesitated. "I don't know exactly. Just that he's more connected than we thought. More successful, maybe. I wanted to make sure you knew what you were getting into." Jasmine assured her everything was fine, but the conversation planted seeds of doubt that grew in the quiet moments when she was alone. She tried asking Blake directly one evening as they sat on the beach watching the sun disappear into the Pacific. "Are you hiding something from me?" He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw conflict warring with care. Everyone hides parts of themselves when they're afraid of losing something that matters. "Don't you?" The response deflected without lying, and Jasmine recognized the technique because she used it herself. They were two people circling truth like dancers afraid to touch, each protecting secrets they feared would destroy what was growing between them. The following week, a reporter appeared outside the clinic. Not the aggressive kind who shouted questions, but a woman with a professional smile who asked politely if Jasmine would comment on her connection to Blake Morrison of Morrison Technologies. The name meant nothing to Jasmine in that moment, but the fact that someone thought it should mean something made her pulse quicken. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, which was true. The reporter's smile never wavered. "You might want to ask him. Before someone else tells you first." That night, Jasmine searched Blake's name online for the first time. She had avoided it deliberately, preferring the person she knew to whatever version existed on screens. But curiosity and fear finally outweighed restraint. The search results filled her screen like an avalanche. Morrison Technologies, a multinational corporation specializing in logistics software and automated systems. Annual revenue in the billions. Blake Morrison, founder and CEO, photographed at charity galas and industry conferences, always in perfectly tailored suits that cost more than her monthly rent. Articles analyzing his business strategies, his investment portfolio, his rumored expansion into artificial intelligence. Jasmine sat on her couch staring at images of a man who looked like Blake but existed in a world she could not fathom. The consultant's story was not exactly a lie, she realized. His companies did consult. But the scale of the truth dwarfed the version he had presented, like an ocean hiding beneath a single wave. Her hands shook as she called him. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm until he heard the tremor in hers. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. Silence stretched between them, heavy with acknowledgement. "Yes," he said finally. "I was trying to find the right time." "When would that be?" "After I looked like a fool for not knowing. After everyone else told me first. I wanted you to know me before you knew what I was worth," Blake said, and the raw honesty in his voice cracked something in her chest. "Every other person I meet sees the money before they see me. You didn't. That was rare enough that I wanted to keep it for as long as I could." Jasmine understood the impulse because she had done the same thing, building a lie to protect herself from expectations she feared she could not meet. But understanding did not erase the betrayal of omission, the feeling that she had been performing intimacy with someone wearing a mask. "I need time to think," she told him, and ended the call before he could respond. Sleep did not come that night. She lay in darkness replaying every conversation, every moment, searching for signs she had missed. The expensive watch he wore casually. The way he never looked at prices on menus. The deference people showed him that she had attributed to natural charisma rather than power and wealth. By morning, her decision felt both clear and impossible. She would meet him one more time, hear whatever explanation he offered, and then decide if the foundation they had built could support the weight of full truth. She texted him an address, a quiet park where they had walked once before, and a time just after sunset. Blake arrived early. Jasmine watched him from a distance, saw the way he checked his phone repeatedly before putting it away, the tension in his posture that spoke of sleepless hours matching her own. When she approached, his relief was visible and heartbreaking. They sat on a bench facing the water, close enough to touch but not touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Blake began to talk, and the story he told rearranged everything she thought she understood about him. He spoke about building his company from nothing, about the loneliness that came with success, about relationships that dissolved when people realized they loved his resources more than his person. He told her about the last woman he dated, who sold their private conversations to tabloids for money he would have given her if she had simply asked. About learning to guard himself so carefully that he forgot what it felt like to be known. "When I met you," he said quietly, "you were trying to push me away. But you were doing it to protect yourself, not to manipulate me into chasing you. That difference mattered. And yes, I should have told you sooner. I know that. I was selfish, and I'm sorry." Jasmine listened, and in his words she heard echoes of her own fears. They were both people who had learned to lead with armor, to test potential partners with partial truths before risking the vulnerability of being fully seen. "I lied to you too," she said finally. "That first night. What I told you about my past. Most of it wasn't true. I was trying to scare you off before you could hurt me." Blake turned to look at her, surprise crossing his features before settling into something softer. "I wondered," he admitted. "The story felt rehearsed. But I figured if you needed to tell it, you had your reasons." They sat with that shared confession, two people who had tried to protect themselves only to discover that protection and connection could not coexist in the same space. Around them, evening fell gently, streetlights flickering to life one by one. "Where do we go from here?" Jasmine asked. Blake took her hand, the first time he had touched her since the truth came out. "We start over. With honesty this time. All of it, even the parts that scare us." But starting over would prove harder than either anticipated, because the world beyond their private confessions had already decided their story belonged to everyone. The photograph appeared online before Jasmine finished her first cup of coffee the next morning. Someone had captured them on that park bench, the image grainy but clear enough to identify both faces. The headline read, "Tech billionaire Blake Morrison's mystery woman, who is she?" Jasmine's phone exploded with notifications. Friend requests from strangers, messages from people she barely knew asking if it was true, texts from coworkers with varying degrees of shock and curiosity. Her private life had become public property in the span of hours, dissected by people who knew nothing about her except that she existed in proximity to wealth. By the time she arrived at the clinic, 3 reporters waited outside. They called her name like they knew her, cameras ready, questions prepared. She kept her head down and pushed through, her supervisor meeting her at the door with an expression that mixed concern and calculation. "We need to talk," Dr. Patricia Holmes said, leading Jasmine to her office with a firmness that allowed no argument. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and felt like an execution. The clinic had received calls from donors concerned about publicity. The board questioned whether Jasmine's relationship might compromise their reputation with veterans, many of whom distrusted wealthy elites. No one was accusing her of anything, Dr. Holmes emphasized, but perhaps it would be best if Jasmine considered taking a leave of absence until the attention died down. "You're punishing me for dating someone," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "We're protecting the clinic," Dr. Holmes corrected. "Your personal choices are your own, but when they affect our ability to serve patients, we have to respond." Jasmine left the office with 2 weeks of forced vacation and a clear message: her value was conditional, dependent on maintaining invisibility. She sat in her car in the parking lot and cried angry tears that she refused to let anyone inside see. Blake called within the hour. "I just saw the article. I'm so sorry. I have lawyers who can shut this down." "Your lawyers can't change the fact that my life just imploded," Jasmine said. "Do you understand what this is like for me? You go back to your tower and your billions, and I'm the mystery woman who everyone thinks is either a gold digger or an idiot. I just lost my job because of you." "You didn't lose your job. They put you on leave. There's a difference." Not from where I'm sitting. Silence filled the line, broken only by their breathing. Finally Blake spoke, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me what you need. I'll do anything. I need you to understand that your world and mine don't mix. I need you to see that this isn't sustainable. I can't live under a microscope, Blake. I won't. Then let me step back. I'll keep my distance, make a public statement that we're not together. Whatever it takes to get them to leave you alone. The offer should have brought relief. Instead it felt like one more betrayal, proof that when pressure came, even good intentions crumbled. Jasmine ended the call without agreeing to anything and drove home through streets that suddenly felt hostile. Every glance from strangers weighted with judgment she might be imagining but could not ignore. The next 3 days passed in a blur of isolation. Jasmine ignored most calls and messages, responding only to her mother and to Rachel, who offered support without questions. She applied for jobs at other clinics, her resume now carrying invisible baggage she could not escape. 2 places called her for interviews, and both asked casually if she anticipated any publicity issues in her personal life. The 4th morning brought an unexpected visitor. Jasmine opened her door to find a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed, with Blake's gray eyes and a presence that commanded attention without effort. My name is Catherine Morrison, the woman said. I'm Blake's mother. May I come in? Jasmine's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won over caution. She stepped aside and let Catherine enter her modest apartment, watching the older woman take in the second-hand furniture and thrift store decorations without visible judgment. I won't waste your time with pleasantries, Catherine said once they were seated. My son is in love with you. He hasn't said it explicitly, but I've known him for 34 years, and I can see what he can't yet admit to himself. The question is whether you feel the same way, or if you're looking for an exit. The directness stunned Jasmine into honesty. I don't know what I feel. A month ago he was just a man I was getting to know. Now he's a billionaire and I'm a liability to my career and everyone has opinions about my life. How am I supposed to figure out my feelings when I can't even think straight? Catherine nodded slowly. That's fair. But let me tell you something about my son. Blake built his company by being smarter and more ruthless than his competitors. But in his personal life, he's terrified. His father and I divorced when he was 12, and it destroyed him. Watching someone he loved choose money over family taught him that wealth corrupts everything it touches. He's spent his adult life trying to find someone who wants him despite his success, not because of it. When he met you, he thought he'd found that. Was he wrong? Jasmine met Catherine's gaze, seeing genuine concern beneath the polished exterior. I don't want his money. I never did. But I also don't want to lose myself in his world. And I don't know if those two things can coexist. Neither does he, Catherine said quietly. But you won't figure it out by hiding from each other. Whatever you decide, make sure it's based on who you both are, not who the world says you should be. After Catherine left, Jasmine sat with those words, turning them over like stones in her hand. She thought about the man who listened to her stories about rescued animals with genuine interest. The man who walked beside her at her pace without rushing. The man who refused to judge her for a lie she told to protect herself. Was that per that evening, she called Blake. I want to see you. Just us, no cameras, no lawyers, no one else's opinions. Can you make that happen? Yes, he said without hesitation. They met at his penthouse, a space she had never seen before. Jasmine expected opulence and found instead a home that felt carefully curated for comfort rather than display. Books lined the walls, worn and read. Photos of family and friends, not business contacts. A kitchen that showed signs of actual use. Blake met her at the door, and she saw the toll the past week had taken on him. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw, a weariness that money could not erase. I'm sorry, he said before she could speak. For all of it. For not telling you sooner, for the media circus, for the way this affected your job. You deserved better. You're right, I did, Jasmine agreed. But I also should have trusted you enough to ask questions instead of assuming the worst. We've both been so busy protecting ourselves that we forgot to actually see each other. They talked for hours that night, peeling back layers they had both kept hidden. Blake told her about the isolation that came with his success, about board meetings where he fought to remember why he built the company in the first place. Jasmine told him about her ex-boyfriend who convinced her that her career ambitions made her unfeminine, about the slow process of rebuilding confidence that those words had shattered. Son still real, or had wealth always been the shadow casting him into false relief? That evening, she called Blake. I want to see you. Just us, no cameras, no lawyers, no one else's opinions. Can you make that happen? Yes, he said without hesitation. They met at his penthouse, a space she had never seen before. Jasmine expected opulence and found instead a home that felt carefully curated for comfort rather than display. Books lined the walls, worn and read. Photos of family and friends, not business contacts. A kitchen that showed signs of actual use. Blake met her at the door, and she saw the toll the past week had taken on him. Dark circles under his eyes, tension in his jaw, a weariness that money could not erase. I'm sorry, he said before she could speak. For all of it. For not telling you sooner, for the media circus, for the way this affected your job. You deserved better. You're right, I did, Jasmine agreed. But I also should have trusted you enough to ask questions instead of assuming the worst. We've both been so busy protecting ourselves that we forgot to actually see each other. They talked for hours that night, peeling back layers they had both kept hidden. Blake told her about the isolation that came with his success, about board meetings where he fought to remember why he built the company in the first place. Jasmine told him about her ex-boyfriend who convinced her that her career ambitions made her unfeminine, about the slow process of rebuilding confidence that those words had shattered. Somewhere past midnight, sitting on his couch with the city lights spread below them like fallen stars, Blake asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. Can you see a future where this works? Where we figure out how to be together despite everything? Jasmine thought about the easy answer, the safe answer, the answer that would protect her from further pain. Then she thought about the man sitting beside her, flawed and real and trying as hard as she was to navigate impossible terrain. I think so, she said carefully. But it has to be on terms we build together. I won't be a secret you hide or an accessory you display. I need to be a partner, an equal, even if our bank accounts will never match. I've never wanted anything less, Blake said, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. The next morning, Blake posted a statement on his company's social media. Brief and direct, it confirmed that he was in a relationship with Jasmine Torres, a veterinary assistant whose work with animals and dedication to animal welfare he deeply admired. He asked for privacy and respect, noting that his personal life would not affect his professional responsibilities. The statement treated Jasmine as a person with value beyond her connection to him, and that distinction mattered more than she expected. The response was mixed. Some praised his transparency, others criticized him for dating below his social class, still others dissected Jasmine's background searching for scandal they would not find. But the fever pitch of speculation began to cool, replaced by the next crisis demanding public attention. Dr. Holmes called 3 days later. The board had reconsidered, she said carefully. If Jasmine was willing to return to work and maintain professional boundaries, her position remained available. The phrasing suggested grudging acceptance rather than genuine support, but Jasmine took what was offered because she loved her work more than she resented the politics. On her first day back, a veteran she had worked with for months greeted her with a grin. Heard you've been making headlines. Don't let the brass rattle you. Anyone who can get Jenkins walking again after that knee injury can handle a few cameras. The casual acceptance from the people whose opinions actually mattered steadied something in Jasmine that had been tilting off balance. She returned to work with renewed focus, and if some co-workers treated her differently, others remained exactly as they had always been. Blake adjusted too, learning to balance his public responsibilities with their private relationship. He made fewer appearances at events that were purely social, delegating more to executives he trusted. He showed up at the clinic sometimes at the end of Jasmine's shift, content to wait while she finished her notes or said goodbye to patients. The photographers came occasionally, but the novelty faded when they realized the couple offered no drama, only quiet consistency. 6 months after that first dinner, they took a trip together to a cabin in the mountains where no one knew Blake's name or cared about his net worth. They hiked trails that demanded attention to footing rather than appearances. They cooked simple meals and talked about everything from philosophy to favorite movies to what kind of dog they might adopt someday. On the last evening, watching sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Jasmine of their first dinner, Blake said, "I'm glad you lied to me that night." She turned to him, surprised. "What? If you hadn't tested me, if you'd just been polite and easy, I would have thought you were like everyone else. But you showed me who you were at your most defensive, most scared. And you gave me the chance to show you that I could handle it. That mattered." Jasmine considered this, remembering the terror she felt speaking those false words, the certainty that they would drive him away. "I'm glad you didn't run. I'm glad you gave me a second chance when you learned the truth about me." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had learned that intimacy required not perfection but persistence, not identical backgrounds but aligned values. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges they would face as they arose. But they faced it together, which made all the difference. Back in the city, life continued with a normalcy that felt hard-won and precious. Jasmine returned to her work with renewed passion, eventually starting a program that brought therapy dogs to veterans struggling with PTSD. Blake invested quietly in the expansion, not as her boyfriend but as someone who believed in the mission. They learned to navigate his world and hers, finding balance in compromise and communication. The lie that began their relationship became a story they told sometimes, carefully, to friends who asked how they met. The punchline was always the same: sometimes the truth requires armor, and sometimes love means seeing past the protection to the person underneath. It was not a fairy tale, not a romance without complications. But it was real, built on honesty they had fought to earn, and that made it stronger than any story they could have invented. Jasmine never regretted the lie that pushed Blake away, because his choice to stay revealed everything she needed to know. And Blake never regretted withholding his wealth, because her choice to see him beyond it proved she was exactly who he hoped she would be. They had both been tested, both been challenged, and both emerged knowing that what they built together could weather the storms that life and circumstance would inevitably bring. In the end, the billionaire's unexpected reaction was not judgment or dismissal, but grace. And the veterinary assistant's unexpected strength was not armor or defense, but the courage to love without guarantees. Together, they wrote a story that belonged to them alone, lived in private moments and shared dreams, invisible to cameras and commentary, real in the only way that mattered.